x dy will give me that the PDF, the joint PDF, equals the product of the marginal PDFs of x and y alone. Okay?
Okay, Doctor.
So basically, two random variables, x and y, are independent if they satisfy this. The joint CDF equals the product of the marginals. The joint PDF, they are equivalent. Yeah, these two are equivalent. You don't need to check both. Either is enough. Any of them is enough. Okay, you don't need to check both because both are equivalent. If the joint CDF equals the product of the marginals of x and y, then أكيد the joint PDF equals the marginals of x and y. تمام? You don't need to check both. Any one of them is okay. Is enough to prove independence. So it goes back to the same definition that we have done before. The joint PDF of two events, sorry, the joint probability of A intersect B equals the probability of A multiplied by the probability of B. Okay. Now, this means we said that in events, the occurrence of B does not affect the probability of A. This is what independence means. In random variables, if we take it the same way, if we would like to find the probability that, sorry, the CDF, the conditional CDF of x given y less than a specific number, the point interval that, the interval conditioning that we have done before, this is equal to the joint probability of x less than x, y less than y, divided by the probability of y less than y. And this is by definition the joint CDF, of x and y divided by the marginal CDF. Now, if they are independent, this joint becomes the product of the marginal CDFs. تمام? This is if independent, x and y. تمام? If they are independent, then basically the marginal CDF, sorry, the joint CDF equals the product of the marginals. Now, fy cancels fy, and you end up with fx of x. Which means that if x and y are independent, then the conditional CDF of x given y less than y equals the marginal CDF of x. So basically, in other words, conditioning on y does not change the distribution or density of x. This is what it means. Conditioning on y does not change the density or distribution of x, and vice versa. Conditioning on x will not change the distribution or density of y. Sorry. Similarly, the conditional PDF of y given x, as we have derived it before, it's equal to the joint PDF divided by the marginal of x. And if independent, x and y, then the joint PDF equals the product of the marginals. Now, fy cancels fy, so the fx of x cancels fx of x, and you end up with fy, which means that conditioning on x does not change the distribution of y. This is what this means. Very similar to the independent events. Conditioning on B doesn't change the probability of A if they are independent. Then the same thing for x and y independent random variables. Conditioning on y does not change the distribution of x. Conditioning on x does not change the distribution or density of y, and so on. طبعا this is a very powerful statement. Now, in order to prove independence, simply you need to find the joint CDF or the joint PDF and to prove that either this statement or the second statement are satisfied. Either the joint CDF equals the product of the marginals, or you need to prove that the joint PDF equals the product of the marginal PDFs, which is very powerful, very strong statement. In chapter 5, we'll come to a less strong notion of independence, which is what we call uncorrelatedness. That requires much easier condition to prove, and it gives you very similar concept. اللي هي correlation uncorrelatedness. We'll come to it in chapter 5. أي سؤال يا شباب؟
everything clear.
طيب يعطيك العافية. شباب ثانيين أي سؤال؟ Let's have some examples. X and Y are independent. X and Y are independent, and we are giving you the joint PDF that we have already done before. The same joint PDF we have done before. We already found fx of x and fy of y, found or derived before in previous classes. Now you can see that if you multiply fx of x with fy of y, you will not get fx of y of x and y. So clearly here, the joint PDF does not equal the product of the marginals. And because of that, you cannot say that x and y are independent. They are not independent. They are dependent. Dependent means what? If one of them had certain event, then the PDF or CDF of the other will change. Okay, so if I condition on X on a certain event, then the PDF and CDF of Y will be different. The conditional PDF and CDF of Y will not be the same as the marginal PDF or CDF. تمام؟
تمام دكتور.
طيب, question, another example, which is he's giving you the joint PDF, yes, as this function. It's an exponential e to minus x over 4 minus y over 3 ux uy. Now, in order to check whether they are independent or not, simply we need to see whether this is equal or not to fx of x, fy of y. Okay? In order to do this, let's see. Fx of x is what? Is the integral of the joint PDF. It's equal to the integral from minus infinity to infinity of the joint PDF, right? With respect to what, Shwab? We integrate with respect to what?
To y.
To y. Exactly, because we want the PDF of x. Excellent. So integrating from minus infinity to infinity, we know that y starts from 0 because you have, exactly. Excellent. So basically, because of that, we start from 0 here, because it's u of y. And you can see that if we integrate, we end up with 1/4 u of x e to minus x over 4. Similarly, in order to find the marginal PDF of y, we need to integrate from minus infinity to infinity of x, y, with respect to what?
X.
dx. Excellent. Now, if we integrate from 0 because x starts from 0 also. And integrating, we end up with this. So now, putting them together, multiplying them, fx of x, fy of y, you can see that they are the same as the joint PDF. So equality holds. Okay? And because of that, they are independent. طبعا, one way to find out whether they are independent or not without calculating the marginal is to check if fx of the joint PDF can be decoupled in x in two functions, separate functions, fx of x and fy of y. يعني بدون ما تحسبوا المارجنال, one of the tricks you can check this. ايش يعني decoupled؟ يعني let us see here. What does decoupled means? Means that if I can rewrite the joint PDF in terms of two separate functions, into two separate functions, into two separate functions multiplied. ايش يعني؟ Let's see here. You can see that here I can decouple. ايش يعني decouple؟ افصل الاكس والواي. You can see that الشيء الوحيد بينهم اللي هو الاكسبوننشال. However, the exponential here can be separated into the product of two exponentials, right?
Yes, doctor.
So basically, you can see that this is equal to 1 over 12 u of x e to minus x over 4, right? Multiplied by u of y e to minus y over 3. Now, if I have this,
other of 5.
now,
One of for f of x, expression
yes,
for f of x, and the other expression for f of y.
exactly. And there's a constant here that I don't know really where to go. Like, it doesn't matter. Here, الفكرة, I am not here interested in finding the marginal PDF. إذا سألني قال لي find the marginal PDF, okay, I can find it. لكن the point is, you can see that you can easily decouple this in terms of a function of x and a function of y. ما نبغى أكتب f ما أبغى أكتبها as fx of x. This is a function of x and another. Because of that, they are independent. Because they can be decoupled. أقدر أفصل الjoint PDF into two functions that are product that are multiplied. واحد function of x والثاني function of y وما لهم علاقة من بعض. They are decoupled. تمام؟
تمام دكتور.
يعني هذه ممكن تكون short cut إذا مثلا في اختبار ولا مرة you are not really interested or you don't have time to find the marginal PDFs. However, you can check whether they can be decoupled or not. يعني مثلا أعطيكم مثال. fx sorry xy equals 1 over k, تمام, for x between 0 and 1. خلينا نكتبها 1 only, and y between 0 and 1. ايش رايكم هذا ايش؟ ايش نسمي هذا الرandom variable؟ نعم؟
It is actually independent.
لا بس قبل ما نوصل هذا اللي هو اليونيفورم, right? If this is x and this is y and this is fx of x, هذا uniform in both. So basically I have here 1, I have 1, then basically I have 1. So basically I have a full cube from 1 to 1. Okay, this is uniform in 2 dimensions. Uniform in x and y. And you can see that this is also independent. Why? Because I can separate this into fx equals 1 between x 0 and 1, and fy equal 1 also between 0 y. صح ولا لا؟ y sorry. شباب واضحة؟
واضحة.
طيب الآن I can give you the other example بس أقيد شيء بسيط. If xy sorry x and y equals the same بس أحط شيء بسيط. This is 0x less than y less than 1. So this is the joint PDF is 1 for values less than between 0 and 1. However, x is always less than y. So look at this condition here. Now I cannot separate. I cannot decouple. And you can see that x and y are not independent. واضحة صح؟ Because in the definition, x is always less than or equal to y. They are not independent in this particular example. Because I wasn't able to decouple the function, the joint PDF. So this is another example. شباب واضحة الفكرة؟ ايش الفرق بين أول مثال والثاني؟ The same, the PDF طبعا is different because here x and y are interrelated. لهم علاقة ببعض.
I think in the second example, because x and y are they have a relationship.
Exactly.
Then condition to be less than 1. That's in the first one. It's free. I think that they're not dependent on each other.
Excellent. X and y here are interrelated through this relationship. X is always less than or equal to y. This is a relationship. This makes the two are not independent. This relationship makes them not independent. بينما هنا there is no relationship. X goes from 0 to 1, Y goes from 0 to 1. I can decouple the joint PDF into two separate PDFs. ما لهم علاقة ببعض. Exactly. أي سؤال يا شباب about the concept of independence and so on.
يعني دكتور ما نقدر نقول مثلا البي دي اف x to the power 0 and y to the power 0 نقول نقدر نسوي لها سيبريت.
وين في المثال هذا الأول ولا الثاني؟
الثاني.
لا هي x to the power 0 ولا ما تفرق، هي ممكن تكتب واحد، لكن الفكرة إنه look at the condition here between them. X is always less than y.
البروبلم في الكونديشن، يعني في الكونديشن فيها علاقة بين الاكس والواي.
Exactly. طبعا هذا الكونديشن هو اللي حدد البي دي اف. يعني البي دي اف هذه is not a cube like هذه لما ترسمها is not a cube. X is always less than y. واضح؟
Yes, yes.
So this is not a uniform. هذه second PDF is not a uniform distribution in x and y. Not uniform. Because here x is always less than y. Yeah, this is not defined for x less than y. واضحة؟ Not defined, sorry, for x larger than y.
Yes.
تمام؟ أي سؤال ثاني يا شباب؟ طيب. Now, for x, if I have 3 random variables, then the 3 random variables x, y, and z are independent if the joint PDF of x, y, and z equals the product of the 3 marginal PDFs. Also, any function of x, any function of y and z, or any function of x and y, any function of y and function of z, and so on, should be also independent. So g and h are any functions. So to say that the joint PDF of X, Y, and Z has to be equal to the product of the marginals, as well as the pairwise. So basically, X, Y, and Z have to be pairwise independent. أول شيء إيش يعني pairwise؟ يا شباب إيش يعني pairwise independent? Means that X and Y independent, X and Z independent, Y and Z independent. هذا أول شيء. Okay? And the three of them are independent. And any function of them is also independent. So if I have n random variables, then any group of the random variables should be independent of any other group. Of any other group. Okay? يعني مثلا إذا عندي أنا n random variables, xn should be independent of x1, x2, and x3, should be independent of x1 plus x2 plus x3, should be independent from any other function of these. تمام يا شباب؟
تمام.
تمام.
طيب الآن in this example we are plotting here هذا نسميه scatter plot. This is very useful plot to show independence أو بعدين حنسميها correlation لما نتكلم عن ال joint moments. This is basically shows the height of people versus the weight of people. Okay, these scatter plots, height versus weight of people. Okay, يعني ايش تتوقع؟ تتوقع انه for people who are خلينا نقول they have fit bodies الطول يتناسب مع الوزن، صح ولا لا؟
Right.
تمام؟ ايش يعني يتناسب؟ معناها if I plot هذه الآن كل نقطة هنا is a data point. ايش يعني data point؟ معناها إذا أنا عندي الآن 100 sample 100 people خلينا نقول I have 100 people. Okay؟ تفضل.
We'll have 100 point, right?
Exactly 100 people نسميها samples. 100 people حيطلع لي هنا 100 points. simply ايش اللي اسويه انا؟ ارسم كل point where does it located. هذا مثلا البوينت هاي represent واحد وزنه او طوله 171 ونص وزنه مثلا كم؟ 64 مثلا. هذه البوينت الطول 170 الوزن تقريبا عندنا كم 67
دكتور
وهكذا. تفضل.
الارقام يعني غير مرتبه، كيف يعني تقرا دياجرام؟
يعني خلينا نرتبها بس معليش sorry for that. let me just
أتوقع بدل ما يكون 68 اللي تحت باليسار يكون 62 هنا الغلط.
هي ملخبطة بس خلينا نرتبها. خلينا نقول هذا 169 بعدين 171 let us write our own numbers 169 171 172 173 174. شكرا للملاحظة. نكتب الأرقام اللي نبغاها 175 176 177 مثلا. وهذا 62 63 64 65 66 and so on. اوكي فإذا كذا معناها أنا I have 100 points. 100 points حيكون شكلهم بالطريقة هذه في التوزيع هذا in this particular example. هذه معناها ايش؟ معناها في حاجة اسمها positive dependence أو نسميها بعدين في chapter 5 هنسميها positive correlation. ايش يعني؟ معناها واضح انت من البلوت هذا scatter plot انه as height increases ايش يصير للويت؟ increases صح ولا لا؟ You can see that there is basically a tendency positive correlation. لما الوزن يزيد يعني لو ناخذ الافرج حق اللاين هذا حنلاقيه انه كذا شكله يعني يمكن كذا. واضح يا شباب؟ هل هذا نقدر نقول عنها independent؟ إذا هذا x، إذا الهايت x والويت y أو العكس. If الويت x والهايت y. Can we say that x and y إيش رأيكم؟ are independent ولا لا؟
they are dependent.
Dependent, right? They are not independent. واضح صح؟ Because you can see that as x increases, y increases and vice versa. They are not independent. بينما هنا second graph you can see that
We have
شوف
run.
كيف دائرة ما في tendency ما في ترند صح؟
Yes.
هذه ممكن للناس الميدل ايجد والناس اللي ما هم رياضيين. هذه ممكن للناس الأطفال أو صغار السن. واضح إنه كل ما يطول الولد يزيد وزنه. بينما هذه ممكن تكون للميدل ايج بيبول اللي هم ما هم رياضيين، اللي عنده كرش واللي وزنه ما ادري كيف شكله واللي and so on. basically طولك لا يعبر عن وزنك. ممكن يكون واحد قصير ووزنه كثير، ممكن يكون العكس. simply ما لهم علاقة. تمام؟ In this case you can see that there is no tendency, no trend. And because no trend they are independent. واضح يا شباب how to read this؟ آخر شيء، طبعا آخر شيء physically not possible. خلينا نقولها كده. physically not make sense. خلينا نقول بالطريقة هذه. لكن بس احنا نحطها كمثال يعني. اللي هو عندك انت tendency بالعكس. as y decreases x increases. هذه نسميها negative dependence or negative correlation. And you can see that there's a negative trend. كده. كل ما الوزن ينقص يزيد الطول. كل ما الوزن كل ما الطول ينقص يزيد الوزن. which physically ما لها معنى. Like we're just showing it as the other extreme, second extreme. واضح شباب؟ Now this scatter plot is very useful and we will use it a lot in chapter 5. اللي هو لما نتكلم عن correlation when we talk about joint moments and correlation and so on. بس واضح الفكرة هنا. What does independent mean؟
دكتور
تفضل.
يعني يمكن بس من الجراف يعني نقول 100% اندبندنت.
لا ما هي 100% بس يعني الشكل يعطيك خلينا نقول يعني هنا واضح انه ما في اي علاقة يعني شوفها كلها كذا كلاستر في دائرة ما في اي علاقة لكن ما تقدر تقول 100% independent. هذه هنا you don't assume. انت in order to say independent لازم يكون عندك شيء mathematically واضح. هذا هو الشيء الوحيد. Okay? This is what independence means. This is not satisfied from here. واضح؟ لكن نحن we're trying to explain what does independence mean. حنيجي في chapter 5 we will define what we call correlation, which is much weaker condition than independence. وساعتها ممكن من السكاتر بلوت you prove that it is they are correlated or not. تمام؟
يس.
لكن independence واضحة. Independence is very simple rule. The joint CDF should be equal to the product of the margins. أي سؤال يا شباب؟ So next time inshallah we'll come to the distribution and density of a sum of random variables, and probably will be able to finish chapter 4 next class inshallah. Time is up I think. If you have any questions, Shibam. those who have other commitments, they can leave. Those of you who have questions, you are welcome to stay and ask. أي سؤال يا شباب؟ Okay, we'll see you inshallah on Thursday. Thank you.